What if the love of your life began as a business arrangement? Lena Hallberg, a fiercely organized accountant, and Julian Whitmore, a billionaire heir with a guarded heart, were forced into an engagement neither of them wanted. But what started as strategy unraveled into something far deeper. Secrets, betrayals, passion, and a love neither could have planned. This is a story of control, chaos, and the courage to choose the undefined path. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that just might change your heart. The rich aroma of dark roast coffee, mingled with a hint of orange zest, drifted through Lena Ray Montgomery's kitchen, weaving between marble counters and polished glass like a familiar lullaby. She stood barefoot on the heated tile, her silk pajama pants brushing her ankles, her every movement precise, rehearsed. The soft hum of jazz Stan Getz this morning floated from the speaker tucked discreetly into the corner of the room. Outside the penthouse windows, Chicago's skyline gleamed beneath the early morning haze, each towering structure perfectly aligned in the distance, just the way Lena liked things. Structured, predictable, in their place. Her slender fingers traced the rim of her favorite mug, the white one with a tiny chipped corner. Third from the left on a custom-built shelf organized by hue. Today was cobalt blue day. She poured her coffee with the steady hand of a surgeon, stirred in exactly 1 teaspoon of raw honey and 3 drops of almond milk, then sipped. Her eyes fluttered shut. It was perfect. Just like every other morning she'd curated down to the minute. Lena was 30, and her life ran with the quiet intensity of a finely tuned machine. By sunrise, she'd already meditated, completed her yoga flow, and responded to the overnight financial alerts from Montgomery Equity, the family firm she practically ran from the shadows. She was the lead analyst, the strategic mind behind most of their most aggressive market plays, though her mother Celeste, the formidable CEO, rarely credited her publicly. It didn't matter. Lena didn't crave spotlight. She craved precision, consistency, control. She adjusted the silk collar of her robe and caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror, high cheekbones, neatly coiled auburn hair, unreadable gray eyes. Her locket, a delicate gold oval on a chain, glinted in the morning light. It had belonged to her grandfather, the only family member who'd ever seen her as more than a Montgomery asset. She never took it off. Even on days when her pulse beat faster than her thoughts, it grounded her, protected her. Just as she was reaching for her tablet to check the markets open in Europe, her phone buzzed once, sharply. An anomaly. Texts and emails were typical at this hour, but never calls. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the name, Celeste Montgomery. No greeting, no good morning, just a single line. Be in my office at 9 sharp. Wear something classic. You'll be photographed. No explanation, no room for refusal. Lena stared at the message, her mind already scanning for possible reasons. A press release, a new acquisition, an internal shakeup, but none of it warranted this level of vague drama. Her fingers tapped her schedule open on the tablet, a meticulously curated grid of tasks, color-coded by urgency and purpose. The day was full. 30-minute segments from now until midnight. And her mother had just taken a sledgehammer to it. By 8:45, Lena stood in the mirror, now wearing a charcoal gray sheath dress and pointed black heels. Hair pinned back in a precise chignon, locket fastened at her throat like armor, she looked every inch the Montgomery heir. But beneath the surface, her pulse thudded with unfamiliar anticipation. She arrived at the glass monolith of Montgomery Equity at exactly 8:58. The lobby's polished floors echoed under her steps as she crossed toward the private elevator, nodding at a few early-rising associates who straightened at the sight of her. On the 47th floor, a hush blanketed the executive wing. Odd. Normally, the place buzzed with morning tension and barely veiled power plays. Celeste's assistant greeted her with an unreadable expression and opened the door to the inner sanctum. Lena stepped inside and immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. There were people here, strangers in tailored suits, board members she hadn't seen in person in years, and one man she didn't recognize, standing with a confidence that matched her mother's. "There she is," Celeste said smoothly, rising from behind her desk like a queen from a throne. "Lena, come in, we have some wonderful news." Lena's eyes narrowed. Her mother only used that tone when she was about to drop a strategic bombshell. And judging by the carefully arranged smiles around the room and the elegant older man beside Celeste, this was no ordinary merger. Something big had been set in motion, and Lena, for once, hadn't seen it coming. Lena didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room like a blade, quiet and gleaming, taking everything in. Her mother's desk was polished to a mirror shine, the skyline glinting behind her like the crown of a cold monarch. The man beside Celeste, mid-60s, elegant in a navy pinstripe suit, every inch of him old money and polished control, offered a cordial nod. His salt and pepper hair was combed back with deliberate precision, his cufflinks discreet platinum. "Lena," Celeste began, her voice silk over steel, "this is Nathaniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings." Lena inclined her head slightly. The name registered instantly. Whitmore Holdings owned a global portfolio of luxury hotels, private aviation, and an elite investment arm. High-profile, family-run, ruthless. She didn't know much about the man himself, but the Whitmore brand was synonymous with wealth and power. The way Celeste introduced him sent a flicker of unease down Lena's spine. There was something ceremonial about it. "The merger between our companies has been finalized," Celeste continued, her tone now clipped with efficiency. "Our combined assets will create the most formidable privately owned equity empire in North America." Lena nodded once. She knew the numbers. She'd seen the projections. She'd even contributed to some of the initial research last year before the deal went quiet. But why call her in now? Why the mysterious tone? Why the photo-ready dress? Nathaniel stepped forward. "Your mother and I, our families, have been allies for decades, Miss Montgomery. This merger is more than financial. It's a fusion of legacy." Lena's brows drew together. "You didn't summon me here for a history lesson." Celeste offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's time you met your fiancé." The word landed like a hammer in Lena's chest. She blinked. "Excuse me?" Nathaniel tapped his phone screen and turned it toward her. On it was a candid image of a man laughing beside a race car. Blonde hair tousled by wind, square jaw, navy blue eyes so piercing they almost felt engineered. She recognized him, Julian Blake Whitmore, the face of tabloid royalty, Manhattan's favorite bachelor, a man whose dating history read like the front row of a Victoria's Secret runway. Her stomach dropped. "No," she said flatly. Celeste raised a brow. "You haven't heard the proposal yet." "No," Lena repeated, sharper this time. "You're suggesting I marry a man I've never met to seal a merger. That isn't a proposal. That's corporate blackmail in a tailored suit." Nathaniel chuckled lightly, as though she were being charming. "Julian is unconventional, yes, but he's also sharp, loyal to the family, and fully aware of what's at stake. Our board is prepared to push the narrative of a strategic alliance built not just on business, but on unity." Lena stared at her mother. "This is the old family agreement, isn't it? The one you used to joke about, a merger of bloodlines. I thought you were being facetious." "I never joke about legacy," Celeste said simply. Lena's mind raced. She tried to picture herself standing beside Julian Whitmore at a press conference, hands clasped, smiling for cameras. She imagined him breezing in with that arrogant glint in his eye, fresh from the Hamptons or wherever he and his tailored ego had last landed. She'd spent her entire life building her identity around competence and calm. This man screamed chaos. "I assume Julian is thrilled by this development?" she asked dryly. Nathaniel hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "He's being informed this morning," he said. Lena's laugh was sharp. "Informed? Like a schedule change." Celeste stepped around the desk, her heels silent on the marble. "Lena, this is bigger than either of us. This merger secures our future, our family's legacy. I understand it's unconventional, but you of all people know how perception drives valuation. A shared front shows strength." Lena folded her arms. "So you want me to play the doting wife for the quarterly earnings call?" "I want you to lead," Celeste said, eyes fierce. "To adapt. To be strategic." Lena inhaled slowly. "And if I refuse? Then we answer questions we don't want asked," Nathaniel replied, voice even. "About company direction, about unity, about weakness." Lena's pulse thundered beneath her skin. Her whole life had been structured for this moment: high honors, top of her class, late nights in data rooms, but not like this. Not for this. "I need time," she said finally, carefully. "You have until noon tomorrow," Celeste replied. "The engagement announcement goes out with the press release at 1. They dismissed her like a boardroom formality. But Lena didn't storm out. She walked, head high, shoulders square. Only once she reached her car did she allow her breath to catch. Her carefully calibrated world had just been upended. She opened her phone, typed, Julian Blake Whitmore. What she saw made her blood run cold. And just like that, the arrangement her mother called destiny began to feel a lot more like war. Julian Blake Whitmore read the email 3 times, then tossed his phone onto the leather bench beside him with a low groan. Outside the gym window, New York's skyline blurred behind the fog of his breath as he leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, sweat dripping from his temples. He'd just finished a brutal 5 a.m. workout, a habit he'd picked up not for vanity, but because hitting something repeatedly was far more effective than therapy, especially when your life was being negotiated like a chess piece in someone else's game. An arranged marriage to a stranger. No correction to Lena Ray Montgomery, financial ice queen and heir to a rival empire. Julian knew her name. Of course he did. Everyone in his circle did. Brilliant, calculated, impeccably groomed, and utterly uninterested in anything that couldn't be quantified in a spreadsheet. Her photos practically smelled like control. If there was a less likely match for him in the entire financial ecosystem, he hadn't met her. He dragged a towel across the back of his neck and stood, stretching out the tension in his shoulders. The merger, he could stomach, even admire. But this corporate cosplay of a marriage? Back in his penthouse, he poured himself a double espresso and stared at the profile his father's assistant had sent like a dating dossier, except creepier. Lena Ray Montgomery, 30. Specializes in merger risk assessment, fluent in French and Mandarin, never married, no social media, favorite author, Virginia Woolf. He rolled his eyes. Of course. He scrolled to the attached contract draft, noting the email subject line, Preliminary Engagement Agreement, Terms for Review. A series of bullet points filled the page, color-coded clauses, naturally. Her terms read like a divorce lawyer's fever dream. No public displays of affection unless previously agreed upon. Separate residences until post-merger period. Individual financial autonomy guaranteed. Weekly joint scheduling sessions to minimize personal conflict. No overnight guests without mutual consent. Access to kitchen and coffee station is non-negotiable. Julian actually laughed at that last one. Coffee station? Who was this woman? Still, as the morning wore on and the press conference loomed, he couldn't shake the sense that she was playing this far smarter than he was. She was drawing battle lines in ink while he was still trying to decide what team he was even on. He respected that. Maybe even admired it. But admiration didn't make him any more interested in sacrificing his personal freedom for a merger he hadn't voted on. When his car pulled up to the Whitmore Holdings Tower, Julian was calm, collected, and dressed for war charcoal suit, open collar, and just enough stubble to keep things casual. The boardroom was already humming with tension. Cameras had been banned from this meeting, but the walls buzzed with the kind of energy that came with knowing too many secrets were about to be spoken aloud. She was already there when he entered Lena. Poised at the far end of the conference table, legs crossed, arms folded neatly in her lap. She looked like a Renaissance portrait, composed, elegant, untouchable. Her locket shimmered faintly against her collarbone. She didn't rise when he entered. She didn't smile. She simply watched him. "Mr. Whitmore," she said evenly. "Ms. Montgomery," he replied with a small nod, moving to sit across from her. He gestured to the folder she'd placed neatly between them. "I read your terms." "Good. I assume you have notes?" He cracked a smile. "Just one. You forgot to include how often I'm allowed to breathe without written permission." Her lips twitched just barely. "I assumed you'd renegotiate that in person. Consider it my opening counteroffer." Their eyes locked for a second longer than was strictly professional. Then Julian opened the folder again and flipped to the kitchen clause. "This one here, no interference with coffee rituals. Are we talking espresso tampering or a full-blown Keurig embargo?" "I take my mornings very seriously," Lena said, tone still cool but not cold. "I gathered." He leaned back, studying her. "I have a few conditions of my own." "I'm listening." He slid a new sheet across the table. "Minimum 1-year commitment before any discussion of dissolution. No pretending in public we present a united front. And," his voice dropped slightly, "total honesty. Between us, no games, no surprises. Lena's brow lifted. And what happens when honesty reveals things we don't want to hear? Then we deal with it, like adults, like equals. She tapped her pen against the edge of the folder. Why are you agreeing to this, Mr. Whitmore? Surely your reputation alone is worth more than a boardroom performance. Because my family name is built on legacy, and apparently I'm a pawn in that legacy now. He paused. But I'll be damned if I let someone else write my lines in this script. Lena regarded him carefully, then extended her hand. Then let's co-author it. Julian took her hand. It was cooler than expected, steady. But in that moment, something shifted, something almost imperceptible, like a floorboard settling under unexpected weight. Do we shake on it? He murmured. Or should we seal it with a press release? Her lips curved just enough to be called a smile. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still the matter of our first public appearance. Oh, he asked. And what did you have in mind? She stood, collected her folder, and glanced over her shoulder. A wedding date, apparently. Julian watched her walk away, and for the first time since this mess began, he wasn't entirely sure who had the upper hand. And he kind of liked it. Lena had never liked waiting, especially not for people who made lateness look charming. She stood on the rooftop terrace of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, the city shimmering around her in twilight gold. A string quartet played something soft and expensive in the corner, and the clink of champagne glasses rose like a rehearsed soundtrack to the evening's orchestration. The event had been billed as a celebration of merger synergy, but Lena knew better. It was a test, their first official public appearance as an engaged couple, a spectacle designed to feed media frenzy and soothe shareholders' nerves. She adjusted the fall of her navy gown, the silk hugging her figure with engineered precision. Her diamond-studded engagement ring caught the last rays of sunlight as she tapped her fingers lightly against her clutch. Her locket rested just above the neckline, always present, always grounding. You look like you're trying not to stab someone with that wine flute, a familiar voice drawled behind her. She didn't turn. You're late. Julian stepped beside her, clad in a classic black tuxedo, his hair artfully tousled like he'd just walked off the cover of GQ. He handed her a glass of champagne, fashionably. Try that excuse with the IRS. He clinked his glass gently against hers. We're not here to audit, Lena. We're here to smile, dazzle, and pretend this whole thing is a fairy tale. She took a small sip. I don't do fairy tales. He tilted his head, studying her with that unreadable expression of his. And yet, here we are standing on a rooftop, playing prince and princess for the shareholders. She finally looked at him. Don't confuse staging with belief. Julian gave a low laugh. You know, for someone who's never been in love, you talk about it like it's a scam. It is a scam, she replied, voice cool but not unkind. A chemical high followed by legal paperwork and emotional insolvency. He blinked. Emotional insolvency. Wow. I'm an analyst, she said, a flicker of a smile ghosting across her lips. I see patterns. And where do I fall in that analysis? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out over the city, the skyline glowing like a promise or a warning. You're the variable I didn't calculate. Julian didn't respond. Not immediately. He just stood there, shoulder brushing hers, sipping his champagne like it wasn't the first honest thing either of them had said all night. The press found them an hour later, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Lena kept her smile polite but distant, her hand resting lightly in the crook of Julian's arm. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Montgomery, how did you two fall in love? One reporter asked. Julian smiled, all practice charm. It was hostile at first, he said with a wink. Like all good mergers. Lena let out a small, unexpected laugh. And eventually, we negotiated a truce. Are you excited about the wedding? Lena's gaze didn't flinch. I'm looking forward to what comes after. The crowd loved it. As the media dispersed, Julian leaned in, voice low. You're good at this. I've been managing hostile environments since I was 12. Impressive. But I have to ask. He stepped closer, the tension between them subtly shifting. Do you always compartmentalize everything, even this? Especially this, she replied, though her voice had softened. Julian studied her face. And if it stops feeling like a compartment, if it starts feeling inconveniently real? She didn't answer, couldn't. The words tangled in her throat, a knot of logic and something else she didn't dare name. Later that night, after the last of the guests had filtered away and the string quartet had packed up their instruments, Julian walked her to her car. The wind tugged gently at the stray curls framing her face. "Thank you," he said, surprising her. "For what?" "For not letting me crash and burn up there. For being more than just a stunning accessory to this absurd circus." She looked at him, the sharpness in her gaze momentarily replaced by something unreadable. "You did your part too." He held the door open for her, then paused. "Lena?" She looked up, waiting. "If this ever stops feeling like a performance for you," his voice was careful, deliberate, "let me know. I'd like to try it without the script." She held his gaze for a beat, then slid into the car. "Good night, Julian." But as the door shut and the driver pulled away, Lena found her fingers reaching up to her locket again, clutching it as if it might explain the thing her heart was starting to whisper, that this wasn't just strategy anymore. And that terrified her more than anything else. The next morning, Lena stood barefoot in her kitchen, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in her hand. The scent of orange zest and dark roast still curled through the air like muscle memory. But she didn't sip. Her usually sharp mind was fogged, distracted by the echo of Julian's words from the night before. "If it starts feeling inconveniently real, let me know." Real. The word tugged at her, lodged beneath her ribs like a splinter. It shouldn't have meant anything. This was all an arrangement, a high-stakes PR maneuver crafted in boardrooms and printed on ivory contracts. But something about the way he'd said it, not flirtatious, not smug, just honest, had left her unsettled. She glanced at the press clippings still open on her tablet. Modern royalty, Whitmore and Montgomery spark fireworks at merger gala. One photo showed her mid-laugh, eyes soft, her hand resting on Julian's chest like it belonged there. The image didn't lie, and that was the problem. It hadn't been fake. Not entirely. Her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Julian, lunch today? No cameras, no suits, just us." She stared at the message for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen. Then, almost without thinking, she typed back, "Lena, where and when?" The restaurant was a quiet French bistro tucked into a tree-lined street in the West Village. No paparazzi, no polished PR handlers, just the clink of silverware and the hush of a lazy afternoon. Julian was already there when she arrived, dressed in a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, hair slightly damp like he'd showered right before leaving. He stood as she approached, pulling her chair out with unexpected care. "I almost didn't come," she admitted, sliding into her seat. "I almost didn't ask," he replied with a faint smile. "But here we are, off script." Their server approached, and Julian didn't order for her, didn't assume. He waited, listened. The smallest detail, but she noticed. Over bouillabaisse and warm bread, their conversation circled the usual safe zones, updates on the merger, board expectations, media strategy. But somewhere between courses, Julian set down his wineglass and said, "Can I ask you something real?" Lena hesitated. "Define real." "No press angle, no family legacy, just me asking you something as a person." She nodded slowly. "Have you ever been in love?" The question landed like a shot to the chest. Lena blinked, lips parting, but no answer came immediately. Finally, she said, "I've been in control. I've been in charge. I've even been in denial. But no, not love." Julian leaned back, watching her carefully. "I have," he said quietly. She stilled. "Let me guess, an heiress? A model? Someone who wears diamonds to bed?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Her name was Sophie. We met at Oxford. She studied literature, wrote poetry on napkins, didn't care who I was. She saw me before I became Julian Whitmore. What happened? She died. Cancer. Fast. Unforgiving." Lena looked away, throat tightening. "I'm sorry. She taught me something I forgot for a while," he continued. "That love doesn't care about legacies or bank accounts. It's not practical or convenient. But when it's real, it changes everything." Lena swallowed hard, fingers tightening around her fork. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," he said, "and worth every bit of risk." The rest of the meal passed in a strange, charged quiet. When the check came, Julian didn't argue or insist. He just smiled when Lena tossed down her black card and said, "Let me handle this one. Call it a business expense." As they stepped outside, the air crisp with early autumn, Julian paused. "You're not what I expected." "I get that a lot." "No, I mean it," he said, softer this time. "You're brilliant and guarded and terrifyingly precise, but under all of it, I think you're also brave." She tilted her head. Brave how? Brave enough to be afraid of the wrong things, he said, and brave enough to question what the right ones are. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, without thinking, Lena leaned in, not quite a kiss, not quite nothing, just a moment where breath mingled and barriers cracked. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For reminding me I'm not a machine. He watched her walk away, her silhouette swallowed by the bustling city. And for the first time, Julian didn't feel like a pawn in someone else's plan. He felt like he'd just taken the first step off the map into something messy, unpredictable, and entirely real. The knock on Lena's office door was soft but insistent, 3 measured taps that matched the rhythm of the tension building in her chest. Come in, she said, not looking up from the acquisition reports spread across her glass desk. Julian stepped inside, dressed down in a navy Henley and slate slacks, somehow still managing to look like a magazine cover without even trying. He held 2 coffee cups in one hand and a brown paper bag tucked under his arm. You didn't show up to the strategy breakfast, he said, placing the coffee in front of her. I sent notes. Her voice was crisp, the kind she used to keep people out. I noticed. He sat across from her, ignoring the unspoken warning in her tone. They were color-coded, very on brand. She didn't smile. What do you want, Julian? He leaned forward, to ask why you've been avoiding me. Lena finally looked up, her eyes cool, unreadable. I haven't. You have, he said evenly. No texts, no calls. You skipped the gala planning meeting. I've seen more of your assistant than I've seen of you. Because I needed space, she said, voice tightening. We agreed on boundaries. I'm honoring them. Julian studied her. We also agreed on honesty. Lena looked down at the coffee he brought. She recognized the scent, Guatemalan blend, cinnamon, 2 sugars. Exactly how she liked it, a detail he shouldn't remember, but did. Things are moving too fast, she said finally, quietly. Julian nodded slowly. And is that a problem? Yes, she said without hesitation, because when things move fast, they get out of control. His voice softened. Lena, this isn't a hostile acquisition. This is just 2 people figuring things out, off the record. She blinked once, then set her pen down carefully. You say that like feelings are safe, like they won't compromise the agreement. They might, he admitted, but maybe that's not a bad thing. She stood suddenly, crossing to the window, arms folded tightly. Outside Manhattan pulsed with life, taxis, people, chaos, everything she usually kept at arm's length. You think I don't feel anything, she said, not turning. That I'm just some cold-blooded strategist with a lockbox where my heart should be. I think you feel too much, Julian said. I think you just don't know where to put it. She turned to face him, anger flashing behind her composure. You don't know me. I know that you memorized my sister's foundation bylaws before we ever met. I know you visited that art exhibit she curated, even though you never mentioned it. I know you send handwritten thank you notes to the junior analysts after major closings. She stared at him, stunned, silent. I see you, Lena, he said gently. And not the woman the boardrooms see. The real you. And that scares the hell out of me, because I think I'm starting to care about someone who might still believe she's unlovable. Her voice cracked, just slightly. I don't believe that. You don't? He stepped closer. Then prove it. She hesitated, her control slipping. How? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Come with me tonight. No strategy, no press, just come. She stared at the envelope, then at him. Where? I'm not telling, he said with a smirk. It'll ruin the surprise. I hate surprises. I know, but maybe you don't hate all of them. Lena took the envelope from his hand, their fingers brushing. The contact sent a jolt through her warm, grounding, dangerous. He smiled at her again, softer this time. You have 3 hours. Wear something comfortable. Then he turned and left, leaving her alone with the coffee, the envelope, and the very real possibility that everything she'd built could fall apart, because for once, she didn't want control. She wanted him. And that terrified her more than anything ever had. The ride to the unknown destination was silent, save for the soft hum of jazz playing through the car's speakers. Lena sat in the back seat, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope Julian had given her. She hadn't opened it. She didn't need to, not really. Whatever was inside wasn't the point. It was the gesture that rattled her, that he wanted her somewhere with him, without an agenda, without cameras, without expectations. That was far more disarming than any boardroom ambush. When the car finally pulled to a stop, the driver stepped out and opened her door. Lena stepped onto a quiet Brooklyn street. Trees swayed gently under streetlights, and the building in front of her was unremarkable brick, tall, unpolished. She glanced back at the driver, but he only gestured toward the entrance. She took a breath and climbed the steps. The door opened before she could knock. Julian stood there, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of something paint on his jaw. For a moment, he just looked at her like he hadn't expected her to actually come. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You came." "I said I would," she replied, lifting an eyebrow. "You're the one who believes in unpredictability." "I believe in following through," he said softly. "Come in." She stepped inside, and the world tilted. The loft was spacious and raw, the ceilings high and wooden beams exposed. The scent of oil paint and something warm sandalwood perhaps filled the air. And then she saw them. Easels, dozens of them, each draped with white sheets, scattered like ghosts across the space. In one corner, a dusty record player played a slow Ella Fitzgerald tune, and lining the far wall, photos, sketchbooks, framed letters, an altar to memory. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. "This was hers, wasn't it?" Julian nodded. "Emily's studio. No one knows about it, not even my father. She was the artist." "She was everything," he said, walking toward one of the easels. "She said color was truth, that the way someone used blue told you more than anything they said out loud." He lifted one of the sheets. Lena gasped. The painting was unfinished, bold strokes of midnight and gold, fierce and fragile all at once. There was movement in the canvas, even without figures, like a storm about to break or a sunrise not yet realized. "She started this the week before she died," Julian said. "She said it was about letting go." Lena stepped closer, drawn in despite herself. "It's breathtaking." "She would have liked you," he said so quietly she barely heard it. She turned to him. "Why?" "Because you're not afraid to be hard to know," he said. "Because you hold your ground. Because you don't pretend." She hated pretending. Something in Lena's chest cracked. Julian moved to a nearby shelf and pulled out a sketchbook. "She drew this too. Said it was for the person who made me believe again." He handed it to her. On the page was a sketch of Julian curled up in a hospital chair, face drawn but calm, one hand outstretched toward a bed just out of frame. A single line scrawled beneath it. "Love isn't safe, but it's always worth the risk." Lena's throat tightened. "Why show me this?" "Because you deserve to know what's behind the polish, the articles, the reputation. Me." He looked at her, eyes bare. "I don't want to pretend with you, Lena. I don't want to perform. I want to be real, even if it's messy." She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached out and touched the sketchbook, her fingers brushing his. "I don't know how to do messy," she said, voice trembling. "I don't know how to not calculate every outcome." "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to let me in." They stood there, surrounded by silence and memory and possibility. And for the first time in years, Lena felt something she couldn't file or color code. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, some equations weren't meant to be solved. Some were meant to be felt. The next morning, Lena sat at her desk, trying to focus on the shareholder briefing documents in front of her. But the words blurred together, numbers slipping out of order, logic unraveling like thread. Her thoughts kept circling back to the studio, the rawness of the space, the scent of old paint, the weight of Emily's spirit lingering in the air. More than that, Julian's words echoed in her chest. "I want to be real even if it's messy." She wasn't used to real. Real wasn't safe. Real couldn't be forecasted in quarterly projections. A soft knock on her office door startled her. "Come in," she called, straightening her blazer, reflexively putting her mask back on. Julian stepped inside, dressed in a charcoal suit, tie slightly askew like he'd rushed over. He held up a tablet. "We have a problem." Her heart dropped. "What happened?" He walked over and set the screen in front of her. A tabloid headline screamed across the top. "Merger of Hearts or a Heart Still Elsewhere." Julian Whitmore spotted with Supermodel X. Beneath it, blurry photos showed him and a tall blonde woman entering an upscale restaurant. The timestamps read 9:47 p.m. the same night Julian had said he was in meetings. Lena's face hardened. "When were these taken?" "Last night," he said, jaw clenched. "Sienna reached out, said she wanted to discuss investing in a wellness line. I thought it was legitimate. Then she showed up early. Paparazzi were waiting." She pushed back from the desk. You thought it was legitimate? I didn't know she had a setup planned, he said, frustrated. I left 5 minutes after realizing it wasn't about business. You should have told me the second it happened. I didn't want to upset you. That's not your call, she snapped, her composure slipping. We made a promise transparency. You asked for honesty. I know, and I broke it. I'm not defending that. She turned away, arms crossed, breathing through the tightness in her chest. She could hear her grandmother's voice in her head. Truth isn't always tidy, but it's always necessary. I can fix this, Julian said quietly. We'll get ahead of the story. Set the narrative straight. I'll hold a press conference. This isn't about a narrative, Lena interrupted, spinning to face him. This is about trust. About me walking into your sister's studio and believing every word you said, then waking up to this. Julian looked wrecked. What can I do? Before she could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. Well, this is cozy. Both turned to see Sienna Marlowe saunter into the office, every inch of her calculated to provoke designer sunglasses, red lips, a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wasn't expecting the Ice Queen herself, Sienna said, lowering her glasses to inspect Lena. I must say you photograph colder than you look. Lena stood tall. This is a private office. Oh, relax. I'm just here to clarify a few things for your benefit. After all, tabloids love a good triangle. Julian stepped between them. Sienna, leave. Sienna only smiled. You think you can trade in your past for a neat little merger and a buttoned-up fiancé? You're forgetting who you used to be, Julian. You liked the chaos. Lena didn't flinch. What he used to be isn't relevant, but you barging into my office to manufacture drama is. Sienna's smile cracked. You're not his type, you know. You think keeping your life in folders and spreadsheets will make you unforgettable? Lena crossed the room slowly, her tone icy calm. I don't need to be unforgettable. I need to be honest. And right now, you're trespassing. Julian stepped in again. Sienna, I'm asking you for the last time, leave. There was a long pause. Then Sienna gave a theatrical shrug. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. As the door clicked shut behind her, silence settled like dust. Lena looked at Julian, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this if I can't believe you. I know, he said, and I'll earn it back, however long it takes. She nodded once, but her expression stayed guarded. Good, because I don't do second chances lightly. I'm not asking for one, he said. I'm asking for the chance to deserve one. And for the first time since the photos appeared, Lena believed he meant every word. But trust, like love, wasn't a promise. It was a process. And right now, that process was only just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of crisis control. Julian's press team worked around the clock to redirect the narrative, spinning statements, releasing carefully chosen photos, trying to reclaim the illusion of harmony. But Lena didn't deal in illusions. She stayed quiet, focused, present, but distant. She arrived early, left late, avoided eye contact. The space between them stretched taut and silent, like glass that could crack at any moment. Julian noticed every inch of it. The way her eyes slid past him during meetings. The way she no longer paused at the coffee station they'd set up together. The way she no longer touched the amethyst pendant she always wore, like she didn't believe in its clarity anymore. Late one evening, Lena stood alone in the boardroom, sorting through thick merger binders by color and priority. The overhead lights flickered slightly, casting shadows over the oak table. She rubbed her temple, exhaustion settling into her bones when her assistant knocked gently on the glass. There's someone here to see you, she said softly. Lena frowned. Who? A woman stepped in before the answer could come. Curly auburn hair, paint on her jeans, wide green eyes. She looked out of place amidst the suits and marble. Hi, the woman said. I'm Mia Callahan. I was Emily's best friend. Lena blinked, startled. I've read about you, in the Foundation files. Mia offered a tentative smile. Julian called me, said you saw the studio. Lena nodded slowly. It was beautiful. Painful, too. That's what she was, Mia said, stepping closer. A beautiful kind of painful. Lena gestured to the chair across from her. What brings you here? Mia reached into her bag and pulled out a sketchbook. This. Lena took it, running her fingers across the worn leather. Inside was a pencil drawing. Julian slumped in a hospital chair, eyes closed, worry etched deep into his brow. His hand reached toward a bed not pictured. It was intimate, raw. and devastating. She drew that the week she passed, Mia said. She never showed it to anyone, except me. Lena stared at the image. Why are you showing me? Because Julian is back in that chair right now, Mia said, voice steady. He's retreating, and you need to know why. Lena closed the sketchbook slowly. You think I don't? I think you're scared too, Mia replied. And I think she'd want you to understand. Lena swallowed hard, the ache in her chest swelling. What am I supposed to do? Pretend this didn't happen? That Sienna didn't? I'm not saying forgive him today, Mia interrupted gently. I'm saying don't walk away from something just because it hurts. Emily didn't. Lena looked up. Emily died. But not before teaching him how to stay when it gets hard. When Mia left, Lena sat in the boardroom alone, sketchbook still open beside her. She stared at Julian's face on the page, how even in sleep he looked like he was trying to save someone. Her phone buzzed. A text. Julian, still at the office. Sorry to miss dinner. Again, she stared at the screen, then grabbed her coat and walked straight to the top floor. Julian's office was dimly lit, the only light coming from his desk lamp. He was hunched over a stack of crisis reports, suit jacket off, tie loosened, looking every bit the man from the sketch. She didn't knock. She opened the door and walked in. Julian looked up, startled. Lena? No more rain checks, she said firmly, stepping into the room. No more disappearing behind spreadsheets. We're not going to do that. He stood slowly. I thought after Sienna you didn't want. I didn't want the lies. I still don't. But I saw the sketch, she said, lifting her chin. And I saw you. I see you. Julian crossed the room, his expression unreadable. And I'm not leaving, she said softly. But you have to stop acting like I'm going to. You have to stop trying to protect me by shutting me out. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded, emotion breaking across his face. Okay, he whispered. Okay. She reached out, took his hand. Tonight we work through this, together. No facades, no spin. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally releasing. You're incredible, you know that? I'm organized, she said with a faint smile. And I love a good strategy. Then let's build a new one, he said, pulling her close. One that starts with the truth. And in that quiet, shared space between two people learning how to trust again, something new began to form, stronger than plans, deeper than damage. Something real. The emergency board meeting stretched into the early hours of the morning. Lena sat beside Julian at the massive glass conference table, her amethyst pendant resting coolly against her collarbone, her heels kicked off under the table without apology. Around them, executives argued in tense tones, spreadsheets were flung onto screens, and market graphs ticked downward in real time. Berkman Associates had launched a full-scale assault, spreading rumors, leaking sensitive documents, rattling investor confidence. But Lena didn't flinch. She'd seen it coming. She'd prepared. Mr. Whitmore, one board member barked, we need assurances. The press is circling like vultures, and stockholders are on edge. Julian leaned forward, voice calm but firm. We have a strategy. All eyes turned to Lena. She stood, smoothing her blouse, and stepped toward the screen at the front of the room. Without a word, she connected her tablet and pulled up a presentation titled Contain, Counter, Reclaim, Defensive Strategy Implementation. I started preparing for this 3 months ago, she began, her voice even. Right after rumors of Berkman's aggressive acquisitions surfaced, I knew they'd come after us eventually, and I didn't plan to let them win. Slides flipped through charts, email records, coded transaction data. They've been inflating numbers in the Southeast Asian markets for over a year, quietly shifting assets through shell subsidiaries. I left breadcrumbs disguised as accounting anomalies in our smaller subsidiaries, just enough for their analysts to bite. A hush fell over the room. You're saying you baited them? One stunned executive asked. I exposed them, Lena clarified. They moved too soon, trying to leverage public perception, but they didn't realize we were documenting every misstep. Julian stood beside her now, proud and sure. What Lena uncovered will trigger an automatic SEC audit on Berkman's holdings. We'll leak it discreetly to the regulatory agency this afternoon. By the time the press hears about it, Berkman will be backpedaling and will be stable again. Malcolm Whitmore, the patriarch, Julian's father, sat in stony silence at the head of the table. For once, he didn't speak. He simply looked at Lena, his steely eyes calculating. You planned this alone? He asked finally. No, Julian said. his voice sharp. She didn't plan it alone, but she led it, and she protected all of us while doing it. Lena's jaw tensed. I did what I had to. This merger wasn't going to collapse because of corporate bullying. A quiet beat passed. Then Malcolm gave a single nod. Impressive. Lena didn't smile. She didn't need to. The data spoke for itself. As the meeting adjourned, she felt Julian's hand brush hers, light, grounding. They didn't speak until they were alone in the elevator. You were extraordinary, he said, his voice low. I watched them underestimate you, and then I watched you burn the room down with a spreadsheet. She allowed herself a small laugh. It's a gift. They reached the lobby, where a throng of reporters already buzzed behind the glass doors. Microphones, cameras, flashing lights. The press conference loomed. The world wanted answers. Julian looked at her. Are you ready for this? She met his gaze, eyes steady. I'm not scared of the press. That's not what I meant. I know, she said softly. And yes, I'm ready. They stepped out together into the chaos. Flashes exploded around them as questions flew from every direction. Is the merger falling apart? Were the financials falsified? Miss Hallberg, are you and Mr. Whitmore still engaged, or was it all a PR stunt? Lena raised a hand. The crowd fell to a hush. There has been an attempt to destabilize our companies, she said clearly, but it has failed. We're moving forward, together. Julian stepped beside her. Our partnership isn't about convenience, it's about trust, strategy, and love. Gasps rippled. The cameras zoomed in. And for the record, Lena added, fingers brushing her amethyst pendant, we never needed a staged love story. We found a real one where we least expected it. Julian looked at her then, and the world seemed to fall away. No boardroom, no press, just them, two people who had turned an arrangement into something real. He reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. She held on. 3 months had passed since Lena and Julian had stood before the press and declared their partnership to the world not just as a merger of corporations, but as something far more intimate, far less planned. And now, as autumn leaves swirled through the streets of Manhattan, their world had settled into a strange kind of rhythm. Some days it still felt unreal how something that started as strategy had transformed into shared glances over morning coffee, soft laughter in the middle of spreadsheet reviews, quiet dinners that turned into conversations about childhood memories and dreams too fragile to admit before. But tonight, none of it felt fragile. Julian stood in the center of Emily's old studio, now transformed into a living space that still held her spirit in every corner. The walls were filled with framed sketches, old canvases, a growing collection of black and white photographs they'd taken together. The studio had become their sanctuary, and tonight it was lit with string lights and flickering candles, the scent of cinnamon coffee floating through the air. Lena stepped into the room slowly, her navy wrap dress fluttering slightly with her movements. Her hair was down, her bare feet quiet against the wooden floor. You remembered, she said softly, spotting the old record player already spinning Ella Fitzgerald in the background. Julian turned to her, smile playing at his lips. Our first real night together, 3 months ago, right here. Same music, same lighting, fewer cameras this time. Her smile was soft, knowing, and fewer doubts. He walked toward her, hands tucked in his pockets, nervous in a way he hadn't been since their first contract negotiation. You once said love complicates clean exits. I remember, she replied, tilting her head. And then you complicated everything. He laughed, stepping close enough to touch her but not yet reaching for her. That's the idea. Lena glanced at the table nearby, where a sketchbook lay closed beside 2 wine glasses. She stepped toward it, her fingers brushing the familiar leather binding. I found this in a drawer, Julian said. It was Emily's. She left something on the last page, something she never showed anyone. Lena opened it carefully. The final sketch was of the studio's sunlight streaming through the windows, a small child seated in the corner with pencils scattered around her. The lines were gentle, the emotion unmistakable. Did she draw this after? Julian nodded. The week before she passed, she said it was a vision, a hope. Lena stared at the image, her heart swelling. A future. Exactly. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not the typical kind, not velvet-lined or glitzy. This one was handmade carved wood, smooth edges, simple and beautiful. Like them. Lena Hallberg, he said, voice thick. I didn't expect to find you when this started. I didn't expect to want things I'd given up on. I didn't expect love to feel like breathing. She blinked rapidly, caught between a smile and tears. But I know now that the best things in life can't be planned, and if you'll let me, I want to keep discovering them with you. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate ring rose gold, set with a small amethyst at the center, her grandmother's stone, her own symbol of clarity. I had it reset, he said. Your grandmother believed it would help you see clearly. I hope it leads you to me. She looked at him, at the boy who had grieved alone in hospital chairs, at the man who learned to cook for comfort, who remembered every detail she shared, who made space for her chaos and taught her that love didn't need permission. I don't need clarity, she whispered. Not anymore. I have you. She slid the ring on herself, then pulled him into a kiss that tasted like every promise she had once been too afraid to make. When they pulled apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. So, what does your schedule say for tomorrow? Blank, she said, all of it. He grinned. Color-coded chaos, here we come. And in that moment, surrounded by Emily's dreams and their own truth, Lena and Julian stood not at the end of a story, but at the beginning of a life that would never be perfect, never be planned, but always be theirs. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Emily's studio, now a warm, vibrant space filled with memory and movement. Lena stood barefoot on the paint-splattered wood floor, cradling a small bundle in her arms. Baby Julian Elias Whitmore, Eli for short, slept soundly against her chest, one tiny hand curled around the chain of her amethyst pendant. He had his father's sleepy smile in her eyes, and though he was only 2 months old, Lena swore he already had opinions about everything. She rocked gently from side to side, humming under her breath as Mia adjusted a frame on the wall nearby. You know, Mia said with a grin, Emily would have loved being an aunt, spoiled him rotten. I think she already has, Lena said, glancing down at the pendant. He sleeps better in this room than anywhere else. That's because she's here, Mia replied simply, setting down her sketch pad. This space is her, and now it's yours too. The walls had changed over the past year. One side still held Emily's bold emotional paintings, but the others had transformed family photographs, Eli's tiny handprints, even a framed copy of the original merger contract with Void stamped dramatically across the front. Lena had insisted they keep it as a joke, a reminder that some plans were meant to be rewritten. Julian entered quietly, balancing 2 mugs of cinnamon coffee. He wore jeans and a soft black tee, his hair still damp from a shower, his expression the perfect mix of exhaustion and awe that came with new fatherhood. He paused in the doorway, just watching her for a beat, his wife, his son, sunlight wrapping around them like a benediction. I brought fuel, he said, offering her a mug. You're a saint, Lena whispered, careful not to jostle Eli. They sat together on the old velvet couch, shoulder to shoulder, sipping coffee and watching their son sleep. The city moved below them, full of noise and ambition, but here in their sanctuary, time moved slower, purposefully, gently. Did you see the latest quarterly report? Lena asked after a while, her tone teasing. Julian groaned. Please tell me you're not talking about financials while holding our baby. She laughed softly. I wasn't going to, but record growth. The board sent a fruit basket. We've officially out-earned every projected merger outcome, he said with mock solemnity, and none of them included a baby in the modeling assumptions. I'll update the spreadsheets. He looked at her, then truly looked and shook his head. You've changed, you know. Lena raised an eyebrow. More emotionally vulnerable, less obsessed with controlling every detail. I was going to say, breathtaking with a baby in your arms and a bun that's falling apart, she smirked. Charming. I mean it. He set down his mug and touched her face. You built this life. You fought for it. For me. For him. I didn't do it alone, she whispered, her fingers closing gently over his. Their son stirred, and Julian leaned forward, brushing a kiss to his forehead. Mia returned with a final sketch in hand. Eli, curled up in Lena's lap, both of them lit from behind by morning sun. It's for your wall, Mia said softly. The start of the next generation of stories. Lena took it with care, emotions swelling in her chest. Thank you. When Mia left and Eli was tucked into his crib beside the studio's wide window, Julian pulled Lena into his arms and held her in the quiet. The kind of silence that didn't demand anything. The kind that was earned. I used to think legacy was about deals, he murmured, about contracts and companies and headlines. And now? She asked. Now I think it's about this. He touched her ring, her necklace, her heart. About love that grows even when it wasn't planned. Lena closed her eyes. Her planner sat forgotten on the nearby shelf, pages unfilled for weeks now. And somehow she was okay with that. Maybe some arrangements, she said, don't need planning at all. Julian kissed her temple. Just love. And in the sanctuary they had built beneath the glow of their past and the promise of their future, they simply existed. Together. Unscripted. Real. At its heart, this story is a reminder that life's most beautiful moments rarely go according to plan. Lena and Julian began as two individuals bound by duty, legacy, and structure, both trained to measure success in numbers, contracts, and careful control. But love doesn't follow blueprints. It disrupts, it surprises, and if we're brave enough, it transforms. This journey taught them and us that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a gateway to connection. That clarity doesn't always come from perfect planning, but from trusting the unknown. True love isn't found in spreadsheets or orchestrated photo ops. It lives in the quiet moments, making coffee the way someone likes it, learning their fears, showing up even when it's hard. Legacy isn't about headlines or market shares. It's about the lives we touch, the truths we protect, the love we fight for. It's about building a future that honors the past while being unafraid to rewrite the story when the heart calls for it. So if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Sometimes the best arrangements are the ones we never saw coming, the ones that challenge us, heal us, and invite us to color outside the lines of expectation. Love messy, real, unexpected is the most powerful legacy we can leave. If this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own journey, let us know in the comments what part of Lena and Julian's story resonated most with you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change the way you see love, life, and yourself. Thanks for watching. See you in the next chapter.